Welcome back to the Magic Hour, everyone. Today we've got a very special guest, Irina Miller from Daisy Lab. I'm Ella Jenkins, the Marketing and Communications Coordinator at Magic Valley, and I'm joined by co-host Paul, our CEO and founder. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Ella. Good to see you.
Great to see you too. So we're very excited to have Irina on today. So Irina is a former business consultant turned biotech startup founder after becoming deeply troubled by the environmental impacts of the dairy industry. Irina previously worked for Fonterra, which is a global dairy cooperative responsible for 30% of the world's dairy exports and New Zealand's largest company. New Zealand is the largest exporter of dairy proteins around the world. And through Daisy Lab, Irina is on a mission to produce dairy proteins without harming the environment and animals. So welcome, Irina. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, great to be here. Thank you for having me.
We're really excited to hear more about your journey. For the audience, could you give a bit of a broad definition of what precision fermentation is?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the process and how it looks, it's actually very similar to traditional fermentation. So if you picture brewing beer or wine, you take a friendly microorganism and you put it in a liquid that has some sort of feed for that organism. Usually it's sugars. If you're making bread, that would be starches, and the microorganisms are eating the feed, and then is part of this producing something valuable. So something that either that tailors either the taste or the function of the food, right? So with bread, it's CO2, it creates bubbles, so the dough rises, so it becomes really spongy and nice. With cheese, it's all sorts of aromatic compounds that make the cheese taste the way it does. With beer and wine, it's alcohol. So we follow this thousands of years old process, but what we do is, the way we explain it is we give our microbes an extra set of genetic instructions. And it sounds simple. There's a little bit of biotech science involved in it. So what we do is we take the DNA from the cow. We don't have to physically harm or even come close to a cow. So cow's genome was sequenced some 10, 15 years ago. It's all online. So you can Google, or it's similar. The search is similar to what your Google search would be, and find the exact encoding that cow uses to produce all sorts of different things, but including those dairy proteins that go into her milk and then later into the cow. So that's what we do. We just say, okay, well, we use this code and we will attempt to convince our yeast to accept this code and use it as well. And there's a bit of negotiation there happening, and that's probably where the real science comes alive. And then the yeast is happy, right? And the yeast is happy, and some yeast is very happy producing those proteins. So we're starting to get some champion strains, as we call them, and we kind of have the champion strain. And once it's strong and happy, we graduate it into a proper fermenter. And then we continue working on new champions then to come through the ranks, and then maybe, beat the old champion, and then that one graduates into fermenter. So once that process has happened, the subsequent process is actually very similar to brewing beer and wine.
Super interesting. And the purpose, of course, is to create an identical dairy product, isn't it? Compared to something like oat milk or soy milk, which might have like a similar taste to milk, but it isn't identical to cow's milk, or like plant-based cheeses that don't have the same stretch that those proteins give?
Yeah, absolutely. So the goal is to produce, so we focused on proteins, and the goal is to produce dairy identical proteins. And we think it's a very reasonable, very simple task for the microbes. Trying to replicate wholesome milk from microbes, so producing all the individual components and then mixing them together, is absolutely scientifically and logically possible, but it seems like a much harder task than just producing a single protein. Interestingly, what New Zealand dairy industry does mostly is we take the wholesome product and then we split it into all the individual ingredients. Statistics is, I believe, only 4% of New Zealand milk is sold as liquid milk.
Wow.
The rest is processed one way. Yeah, so that's this is the kind of why that is so obvious being here. So the rest is processed, and a lot of the processed milk ends up as powders, so as ingredients.
Mm.
Milk powders, skim milk powders, but also individual protein powders. And the more pure those ingredients are, the more sort of isolated they are, the more expensive they become. So you kind of go, well, this sort of doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah, definitely.
If we were to have cows, then maybe we should just leave them to produce that wholesome product. I don't consume cow's milk, but just from the logic, leave the ethics perspective, but just from the logic perspective, well, if that's what the cow does, let her do that. Well, microbes are a lot better at just doing individual ingredients, and the purification of those ingredients is a lot simpler, faster, and you get a much more pure product in the end. Molecularly, it's identical to cow's milk. That's what we're doing today. But then also, if you think about it, if you can't produce any protein you want, why would it be cows? It's just a conventional kind of habitual thing. It's easier for consumers to understand. It's easier for regulators to approve it. Bizarre thought, but that's true. And they sort of laugh at it kind of themselves, because if we were to come and table a human beta-lactoglobulin made using exactly the same process that we currently use for our bovine beta-lactoglobulin, the regulators globally will have a lot harder time approving it, because that would be, surprise, surprise, a new ingredient. While bovine beta-lactoglobulin is in wide circulation already, we know in general people are not allergic to it. So it's a much easier ingredient to approve in many jurisdictions. So I just find this really funny about how the world functions. It's very amusing. But in the future, I'm sure that both consumers and regulatory environment will be ready for human proteins, special proteins, designer proteins, so anything that can really support human health, nutrition, but also make sure that we save our planet.
And obviously dairy is a huge industry in New Zealand, so it's very purposeful that you guys are based there. Would you mind speaking a little bit about your experience working at Fonterra, what that was like, and giving some context for our audience, which is both Australian and a bit international, what the dairy industry is to New Zealand and how it was working at Fonterra?
Look, I joined Fonterra after having spent most of my kind of career in consulting. So it was a big business. It looked incredibly attractive. I was aligned with the mission, with how I understood the mission, which was driving value instead of volume. So making sure that New Zealand clean, green image translates into the final customer product. I worked or interacted with the company in my consulting role. So everything was really exciting about it. It felt different from any other fast-moving consumer good companies, being a co-op, being really tied to farmers' values. And I was a big dairy consumer. Like, dairy was my protein of choice, which is utterly bizarre, because I was a vegetarian probably from the age of 4.
That's a long time.
Not strictly, because I'm sure, well, not strictly because my parents did all they could to try and smuggle meat into my diet. But I think as a child, I connected very early to where meat comes from. And I had no connection to where dairy comes from, which is, by the time I joined Fonterra, I was in my mid-30s. I had 2 children, which I breastfed. And still, it just wasn't quite adding up in my head as to what milk actually is. And you block out those thoughts. You kind of think, well, maybe it's 1 calf every 10 years, right? And then it just happens. We've just, bred the cows in a way they just, lactate for 5, 10 years after. And you don't ask yourself questions as what about all the male cows? Where do they go? How does that all happen? So it's just kind of seems absolutely. And I was a hobby cheesemaker. I love the chemistry of how cheese coagulates and it stretches. And I used to make my own mozzarella at home and halloumi and all sorts of different. I just love that aspect of it. I thought it was an incredible, beautiful product. And Fonterra as a company is great. Like it definitely has this global scale, this excitement, this opportunity. People are great. Like in general, New Zealand businesses are pretty good. I've worked kind of internationally before. People are there to do the right thing. It's quite effective in what it does, which is selling the bulk ingredient all over the world. While there, obviously, you start to understand a little bit more the complexities of the organization, the milk supply, the farmer relationships. The fact that volume is still what is supported from the organizational kind of design and incentive perspective. Yes, we talk a lot about let's drive value, but really what we're driving is still volume. And again, logically, if you distance yourself from all the resources that go into it, it makes sense because we're in New Zealand. Shipping consumer products globally is hard. Shipping powders is a lot easier. They don't spoil. It's easier to plan the supply and demand when you do this huge industrial scale dairy. So, but then it's just that I'm a numbers person, so numbers really started kind of filtering in. I also kind of learned about what the milk supply curve is like and what it depends on, which it depends on cows calving every year. So that was, I guess, a revelation for me that they have to be pregnant every year. And I think it kind of started snowballing from that. So once I realized, well, it's millions of cows and they're pregnant every year, and the numbers just started. You can't sort of unknow once you know.
Yeah.
For a while, I was playing, and this is true. Now reflecting, remembering this, I'd be going to work, and I'd kind of just be playing the mental mathematical bargaining with myself. So I'd literally actually going to work. I calculated how many lives per gram of protein have to be sacrificed or lost in dairy versus meat production. And dairy comes out about 5 times less lives per gram of protein. So I guess that thought was slightly soothing for a while. But then again, you kind of go, well, that's still kind of horrible.
A big number, yeah.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I found it interesting. I saw an interview that you were speaking in where you were mentioning the fact that you were vegan, and that it's interesting hearing that dairy proteins used to be like your protein of choice, and that was something that at some point you transitioned to a vegan diet. And I think it's interesting because it was similar what you were saying to Paul, your position with Magic Valley, that the target audience for your product isn't someone like you who now has a vegan diet, but more about kind of creating that change. So it's kind of a similar kind of parallel there. What was that journey to veganism like for you, and where did that begin? Was there like a pivotal moment that brought you to that choice?
Well, kind of both. Well, Fonterra really was it laid the ground for my veganism, and because we have a big family. So my husband and I've got a blended family. We've got 4 kids, so it wasn't just me making a choice switching. It had to be a partnership kind of decision. But I think I didn't even work on him. I think it's just me bringing home all of those conversations and talking about it. I think he started changing as well. So I was pretty much a vegetarian. My husband was like a paleo, so he used to eat meat. Sorry if there's noise. Like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Seriously, when we got together, I switched him to some vegetarian meals every now and then. So he kind of got used to the idea of you actually can't have a meal without having meat with it. And I guess it's just months and months of me just sort of bringing all this energy home. And then, so that was the groundswell, right? And then I was still at Fonterra. I think I had like a 3-month leave notice. So I've already filed to leave, and probably a month into it, we watched one of the Netflix documentaries. I think it was Cowspiracy or something like that, which is obviously, we watched it and we realized it was biased, but then also we're like, well, it might be biased and somewhat exaggerated, but it is actually all true. So, and he offered, he said, well, let's try just going plant-based for a week. And that's it. So that's been 7+ years now that we've been. So that week, then we got to the end of the week. I didn't think he would last, so it was a lot easier for me. But he loved it, and he said, "Well, let's carry on until it maybe stops making sense," because obviously coming out of very traditional meat-eating diet, we thought that we're going to fall over in 6 months and be iron deficient and protein deficient and all sorts. So he kind of took it a bit carefully, and we did all of this, blood tests every 2 months and checking and
Just waiting for
thinking
something.
about protein powders, making sure we get enough protein. But then it kind of just, you go, well, actually, I feel so much better than I ever have. And it just becomes, so now it's so ingrained. It's just a part of life. We can't even imagine going back. Your taste buds change. Look, never say never. I know some people go vegan for many years, and then for some reason, health reasons or change in beliefs, so they switch back. But for now, it would be really hard for us to imagine that.
Yeah.
Amazing. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points in terms of the dairy industry. I was vegetarian for 20 years myself before going vegan. And I mean, the reality is, in my opinion, dairy is the cruelest industry of all. You're artificially inseminating cows, month after month after month to keep them producing milk. When they can no longer produce milk, they're sent off to the slaughterhouse. Bobby calves, any male calves that they have, are slaughtered the day or the day after or very early on as well. And when I learned all of that, that was one of the key drivers for me to go vegan. So I think what you're doing is amazing at Daisy Lab in terms of, addressing, that issue amongst many issues. I'm just interested then in how your relationship is, either with Fonterra or with other consumers or other companies or retail brands within New Zealand, because obviously dairy is a massive industry in New Zealand.
Do you know what? And this is actually, in a way, astonishing, because I thought we're starting something quite controversial. I thought that we were going to be getting hate mail and a lot of official and unofficial pushback. And I was fully prepared for that, because I thought, well, people are emotional, and we are essentially, disrupting or have the potential to disrupt their current livelihood. And I thought that was going to be received by some people who just, people are like, I have full empathy. I was prepared for that. And we still to see a single aggressive comment or a hate mail. We, in fact, quite the opposite. We get emails of encouragement just about every day from everywhere, from members of the public, from farmers. We have farmers reaching out to us saying, this is great, this is the future, how do I invest in Daisy Lab? The industry is very receptive. We have not had any official conversations with Fonterra, but that's potentially because they've sort of started something of their own over in Netherlands with DSM, with Vivici. But in general, dairies, we have a dairy company that has invested in us, and we have traditional dairy companies who reach out wanting to do product development with us. So everyone seems to be incredibly receptive. And this is a really hard thing to explain. I think probably you guys in Australia will get it better, but like talking to someone coming from the US, it's incredibly hard to even fathom that people can have such centric, rational, non-polarized views on things, that it doesn't have to be a constant lobby or constant kind of aggression towards
each other.
Exactly, going against each other. So it was incredibly encouraging. I mean, if you look at the dairy at our dairy ecosystem that we've kind of started engaging first with, which mostly research institutes, academia, kind of dairy scientist population. I mean, saw so much excitement because, and I can't, again, you kind of get it because how much innovation has been happening in dairy in the last kind of, 1,000 years. There's been quite a bit, maybe in the last 100 years, but a lot of it's just engineering innovation. And of course, like a better understanding of the chemistry of the proteins. And then suddenly this whole new thing, this whole new opportunity. So scientists, like dairy scientists, food scientists, get incredibly excited. We are going to our largest kind of like a farming trade show in June, and it's 4 days, and we're going to have a stand, and we're probably going to have a lot of public engagement and talking to people. So that is going to be interesting. That's been my dream, I think, since starting Daisy Labs, going to field days and just talking to people, just kind of giving them an idea of what this technology is, what it is capable of, and kind of leaving it with them. I think, look, we know that we're not going to disrupt dairy tomorrow. So just the volumes are fast, that it's not going to happen. But I think people need to be aware that this is coming. One way or another, where it's in New Zealand or elsewhere, it's coming. We need to diversify, and that is definitely starting to happen, which is also very satisfying. And I'm not saying that that's because of our efforts. I think people just genuinely realizing that the small country and island, a very fragile ecosystem, we just can't afford huge industrial dairying. So yeah, I think there's been a lot of positive change, and that's what I'm focused on.
One of the interesting things is the environmental impact of the farming, and especially the dairy farming that goes on in New Zealand, the fact that it's turning lakes unswimmable, and, considering the fact that tourism is another really big important industry, that's quite a concern. Do you think that people have, like the general public has a good understanding of the relationship between those environmental impacts, the pollution, the environmental destruction, and the dairy industry, or do you think it's hard for people to connect the two?
100%. And this is, again, something we're pitching to investors every day. We're saying that if you want to trial a precision fermentation product and really make it a blockbuster, New Zealand is the place to do it. I mean, it obviously has to taste good, but people will buy it. So whether people will buy it second time, third time, that depends on the quality of the product. Yeah. But that first purchase, people will do just because everyone wants to believe that we can turn away from dairy. I mean, I'm not talking about, obviously, everyone is exaggeration, but the vast majority of the country knows and notices that we have to do something about dairy. Now, we may disagree on what that something is and what the magic bullet is going to be, and there's probably none. So there's probably going to be a number of different solutions, but people are open to any solution that would reduce the environmental impact, because you're absolutely right. People drive around the country and they see it. They see that, well, last time I drove to my batch, or 10 years ago when I was a kid, this looked entirely different. And people are very aware of that. People want to preserve this beautiful country. People love living in New Zealand. A lot of people go overseas and come back and have kids here. People want to have this country for their children. So there's a lot of consumer interest, a lot of consumer understanding of the technology already. And I think once the product is out in the supermarket shelves, there will be a lot of a lot of conversion, a lot of purchases.
It's exactly the point that I was going to ask about as well, in terms of, the agricultural sector and, potentially Fonterra themselves, just the amount of climate pollution that comes from the industry and from Fonterra. And I guess your description of people, New Zealand is quite small, and people being able to, as you said, drive past regions where they, grew up as a child or whatever, and see the change makes it really tangible. I think that's something we lack a little bit here in Australia because it's so large. The impacts of climate change aren't felt on such a tangible basis. Everyone here still thinks food comes from the supermarket, and there's a bit of a disconnect and a lack of understanding. So, do you think there's that groundswell of support from the community in terms of the climate aspects, or the climate benefits, I guess, of a technology such as precision fermentation?
Absolutely. I think Well, to be honest, I don't know whether that's a global climate change that's driving the consumer interest, or just a bit more close to home. Just people know that lots of waters are, unswimmable. The nitrogen content in many places in New Zealand in drinking water is a lot higher than we would probably have wanted it, and it impacts people's health. So people know that. New Zealanders know it. And again, we could disagree on what solutions like, but this is why I live in New Zealand, is that the conversation is always possible. So we can disagree and walk away, maybe disagreeing with each other, but the open, logical conversation about different solutions is absolutely possible.
I really like that perspective, and I think that is really important, to be able to have that open dialogue. I'm interested how veganism is accepted in New Zealand, whether it's similar to in Australia, and whether you think that that's related to how people are accepting precision fermentation as a possible solution.
Veganism in New Zealand, I think it's probably very similar. Again, I don't live in Australia, but just from what I understand, it's probably very similar. So it's definitely on the rise. It's on a slower rise now than it was probably a couple of years ago. It was incredibly fashionable and in thing probably 2-3 years ago. And it was quite satisfying to watch. It's probably a bit have slowed down because there's been a lot of, global, I suppose, push back. And to be honest, I think maybe us as vegans, we've overdone it as a community sometimes, because obviously we're so passionate and we see the injustice so clearly and feel it so acutely. Like people, I am passionate about as well. And if I let myself sit in it and think about it, it is starting to hurt. Like it's hard. But I guess what is a vegan community we don't always understand is that we work with a society that has so many defense mechanisms, and it's just like working with a person that's built up defenses to support their lifestyle. It's just really hard to break through this just by being passionate and active, because there's so many things that go so deep. Cultural food is such an emotional topic and such an emotive connection. I think it's going in the right direction still, maybe slower right now, but people are more and more like, we look at the kids that our kids are friends with, and they're a lot more open and understanding. At least they're asking themselves questions. They might still decide to block it out, or still decide that, a taste of meat is what I'm going to go after. But at least this awareness is filtering through, and that's great. That's all you can do. Look, I guess when you've been vegan for a while, you've kind of just learned to pick your battles, right? When you just become a fresh new vegan, it pains you that you can't make a change fast enough, because you focus on what is still happening. You focus on still how many lives are lost every day, how much suffering there still exists. And it's like, even now I'm talking to you about it, and it's horrible, right?
Yeah.
But then you can also focus on, well, with every action I do, how many lives am I sparing? How much? Just every time going to the supermarket and voting with your wallet. And I'm one of those, like, I'm not imposing my beliefs. My kids are not vegan, so like 2 of them are vegetarian, others eat meat. But when I'm buying something, I always say, well, no, it's vegan pizza. And if you don't like vegan cheese, then there's no cheese on the pizza. So it's sort of those kind of things. And then, if you go and you hang out with friends, that's your call. So I guess it just focus on what you can change.
Yeah, that's very interesting. There's definitely a parallel there to, Paul, what you've spoken about with going from activism into like founding Magic Valley. And like we were talking about before, the core of the idea and the mission both companies are aiming to produce identical products that still give people that option to eat this product that they know and love while reducing the harm to animals and the environment is so important because food is such an emotional thing. And because of what you were speaking about with like these culturally ingrained ideas about food that we have, it's so difficult to create change on such a large scale. There's definitely, like you say, very strong defense mechanisms. It's difficult to hear that these things that have become so normal and ingrained in society and like accepted as normal are actually causing harm, and that needs change, and change is difficult for people.
Well, I always give my example, which I already mentioned, right? I was 35. I had 2 children, and I consider myself a person of, at least an average intellect. Like, I studied biology. I know how mammalian bodies work. And yet I just really never thought about where milk comes from. That is how strong those defense mechanisms are. Like, that's what we're working with. We just need to start moving the society in the right direction. And I think we'll get there. I want to believe that.
Yeah. And what do you see as the importance of like companies like this in the alt protein industry in particular that are making these kind of identical products as opposed to like something plant-based or like an oat milk? What do you see as like the importance of these products that people know and love that are actually identical as an option to people?
Well, I think it's right. It's yet another solution. So I'm all for plant-based, right? Again, if you ask me, I probably don't need cellular meat or precision fermentation products. Personally, I'm very happy with lentils and hummus and falafels and everything. I think you can make amazing things out of plants, and they taste so much better, and they keep acquiring taste as you go. And it's so much easier. Like, you keep things. We never throw food out because you can eat plant-based curry for a week and it doesn't go off. It only gets better. Like, that's not the case with chicken, right? You wouldn't eat the chicken curry after whatever that is, 2 or 3 days. It's dangerous. It's just a much better way to live. But I think there's a number of things. It's human nutrition is a civilization. We've grown up with certain foods and certain nutritional elements, and it's just hard from the human public health perspective to just remove all the proteins. It's the familiarity of things, but it's also and I guess that's probably, again, what makes us a little bit different is because we're looking a lot at what dairy industry does, and we're thinking, well, how can we work with the dairy industry? What can we do to actually make sure that all of the stainless steel that's been produced and installed and is already on the factory floor, how can we use this? How can we actually transition the industry rather than disrupt it? I guess that is very important. And we have so much knowledge already about those proteins and how they behave and the value they add in different product formulations. All of that is just a shame to lose that. So what we're saying, we just want to replace the upstream, right? The cow and the delivery truck with a fermenter. The downstream processing is the same.
Yeah.
Can I ask about the alternative protein ecosystem in New Zealand? Is there collaboration between companies? Is there support from the universities, the government? How's the ecosystem over there in New Zealand?
There is an ecosystem. It's obviously not an incredibly, like New Zealanders in general, it's just a smaller country. Plant-based products, I have to say, probably less supported. Unfortunately, I don't know why. I think plant-based is an investment. Is an investment opportunity, just kind of getting. But I think it's a bit of a fashion. Like, it's a bit of a just a common catchphrase globally, and then investor circles, that plant-based is not going to go anywhere, or is not worth investing, or there's just the impression that we get from that. I disagree. I think we constantly need products, and some of the products we already have need scaling up, and they're doing really well. Like if you look at some of the plant-based companies, they're doing really well. So I think it'll turn around. I think that's just gonna float back because people still want that. But yeah, there's definitely collaboration. So we are working with Raglan Foods, which is the largest alternative dairy company in New Zealand. So they're producing coconut yogurt. So we are producing products with them, and we do have interest from other alternative dairy providers as well to work. We just don't have enough protein just yet, but we will and definitely want to collaborate with many. It's very supportive ecosystem, but probably not a very large one.
But with the size of the dairy industry, do you see that as like a key reason why New Zealand is the right place for you guys? And how core is that to your mission and what the vision is for the impact that you can have?
Absolutely. So that is the whole point. So in many ways, we started Daisy Lab to just show, because I was frustrated that this wasn't done in New Zealand. So to me, when I first kind of connected the dots and realized, well, we're just making individual proteins and microbes can do it very well. And I knew about this from just using microbial rennet because I was a hobby cheesemaker and researched what rennet was as an ingredient.
Finding out that Parmesan wasn't vegetarian was
exactly
so freaky.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. So that was the journey I was on. So I kind of freaked out, thinking, "Oh my gosh, what haven't I been eating? This is so gross." But then it's like, "Oh no, that's fine. Most of the rennet produced is microbial, and in fact, people you can read on the label microbial rennet or vegetarian rennet. That means that that's rennet produced using microorganisms." So I had this first look into what this technology was back then, and I thought, well, but hang on a second, if we can do that with rennet, why can't we do it with all the other proteins we spend so much time trying to separate from milk? And the idea seemed so incredibly common sense that I didn't think that it's even worth me trying to do anything, that I thought Fonterra is going to be doing it in 18 months time, and then I maybe rejoin them or just something like that. But big companies don't move very fast, as it turns out. And I just kept waiting. And then when nothing was happening, that's where I was just like, we just have to do something, because it started developing overseas. So it was a little bit, nobody's actually had this conversation with the farmers, with the community. So people are thinking, oh, that's something over there in Silicon Valley, somewhere on Mars, it'll never get to us. People will always want our milk. But I think it was just really important to also have that conversation here that, well, actually, it's not somewhere there. It's real. You can come, you can taste, you can look. So I guess that's also very, very important mission for us. Whether we're gonna always stay in New Zealand, I'm not sure. If we were to build, if Daisy Lab ever was to build our own commercial plant, that wouldn't be in New Zealand, or not, at least not just in New Zealand. So it would be somewhere else, close to market, close to feedstock, just better position. But I think New Zealand just has so much knowledge in protein processing and process engineering around it, that it's the best place to build this technology.
I've got a couple of questions now, just to slightly switch topic around your transition from the corporate world or a consulting role into a startup. What was that experience like? What were you expecting? How did it rate compared to your expectations? And also, I guess, what were some of the surprises and some of the things you found helpful? Because I guess a lot of our listeners are founders themselves.
Right. So it was a very gradual transition, because Daisy Lab was kind of like bootstrapped and a bit on a shoestring budget. Even when we raised our first safe note, we were still pretty lean, and neither of co-founders were paid at that stage. So I think I've kind of retained my corporate job or consulting projects for quite a while. So I've only come on board full time to Daisy Lab early last year. And at that stage, I was already basically working 2 jobs. So I had my day job and then the Daisy Lab job. And it was just becoming, because we were raising seed and it was nonstop, really. So that was quite a relief to at least lose one of those jobs. It was great. I never saw myself as a startup founder before. I quite like the predictability of the corporate world. I probably also wasn't in a position to ever have one because I sort of been a single mom for a substantial chunk of time. And then we had a mortgage. And then, you just get into this whole cycle of, grown up life with kids and family. And then everything is just kind of goes just like it does. So got together with my husband and we sort of substantially reduced our mortgage, and for a while didn't even have it. So that kind of freed up some space, some mental space as well. Kids have gotten kind of a bit older and a bit more self-sufficient. And that's where, so Daisy Lab was initially is just more of a project that we felt passionate about. I'm really enjoying it. I think it's probably the first and the last startup I ever found, right? I ever initiate. It's quite, obviously quite taxing. I'm really happy. So it is my happy space. I think that was a fantastic opportunity. And so when we were starting Daisy Lab and bootstrapping it, we kind of like, well, it's about, whatever that was to pay for a master's student and reagents. It was, 30, 50 grand. And it was about the cost of a master's degree. And I was like, I don't think I'll get as much interest and value from a master's degree than from founding a startup. So I'm really happy that I went with the startup. Well, and it really wasn't even a choice for me, because it was just like, well, if I go to master's, it's just still so theoretical. This I really wanted to do. I just really wanted to do something, not because it gives me knowledge or a potential reward, a financial reward at the end, but just because I have that just burning thought that it had to be done. And I think that is probably, for me, it's incredibly important. I don't think I would have ever been able to go through this, lead people through this, function under so much pressure if it wasn't something that I felt so passionate about.
Absolutely, yeah. Look, I think being mission driven is super important to maintain the motivation to keep going through the tougher times.
Yeah, it just kind of helps you connect the dots, right? So sometimes when you sort of I remember in my previous career when I would have thought, that's sort of like either too hard or too easy, or I don't want to do this, or, I'm not really a marketing person, or I'm not really a podcast person, or I don't really like presenting, or whatever that is that limits your growth. Normally, you just put it somewhere to the back. You just move it. Well, there's no one else to do it, so I got it, and you just kind of go and do it, and then you surprise yourself thinking, oh, maybe I am a marketing person. Maybe I can do this as well. So yeah, there's been a really cool experience in this sense. But it's honestly it's hard. It's put strain on put strain on your own mental health, put strain on your family, put strain on your relationships. So you kind of have to be mindful of that as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on your point, Irina, about working 2 jobs at once. That really resonates with me and reflects my experience as well with my first business, where I was working 2 jobs full time for 2 or 3 years in order to make it work as a startup founder. And I think it's a really important point to note, because I have a lot of researchers or uni students or people even in current jobs come to me and say, oh, we're going to raise this amount of money and we're going to pay ourselves, $100,000 a year. And this is how it's going to, we're just going to transition across and, just start tomorrow sort of thing. And there's just, I guess, a bit of a lack of understanding of actually how difficult it is, when you are starting a business, whether you're pre-revenue or it's a new company and you might slowly generate revenue, but you are starting from scratch, and it really is a sacrifice to be able to do both of those things at once. So I just think it's a really important point that you make. That's just the actual reality of starting a business from scratch.
Yeah, so I can look. I've seen those examples as well when people raise and pay themselves. And look, at some stage, I had to half my salary from at least half, probably more than that, from the corporate, just to make the numbers work, because I knew that given the equity I've got, there's other and the passion I've got, I will still continue, but I have to pay my scientists because they've got families, they've got mortgages,
100%.
they've got kids, they've got the market that's out there, right? And of course, they also are very passionate and want to work for Daisy Lab, and we've got other ways like ESOPs and whatnot to retain them in addition to payment, but they kind of come first. So you sort of get what's left. It has to change at some stage as well, because I also it just puts the strain on the family, right? When you have two providers, two grown-ups working at the at the relatively kind of high level, and then one of them drops off, it does, kids still want to travel, kids still want to go overseas, but I think everyone's been like my family. They're amazing, so I definitely wouldn't have been able to do any of that. I think they understand. They understand that this is probably not entirely for the money.
Yeah. It's super important to have a support network around you. How have you found the fundraising experience? Obviously, as you mentioned, you're able to close, I think, an oversubscribed round last year. How did you find that experience, and how have you found fundraising in general?
Well, look, fundraising is definitely not my favorite part of the job for me. It's tough. It was tough last year. It's I'm sure going to be tough, if not be tougher this year. Finding the lead is always the hardest, at least for us, because we know we have quite a bit of support amongst our current investors. All current investors, they all kind of expressed interest to follow. But it's just, and we've got others that are genuinely interested in investing in Daisy Lab. And to be honest, I think we're in New Zealand, we're a kind of business that if we had to raise a third of our round by crowdfunding, we probably would. We just have to spread the word in the right way. It's not necessarily something I really want to do, but I think that's definitely an option for us. Finding leaders is the hardest. But once we do, I'm pretty confident that we will close the round quite quickly. And it was sort of the same last time. So finding lead was the hardest. It's generally the hardest in New Zealand ecosystem. I don't know if you guys experience the same, that it's usually the hardest to just find someone who can table the term sheet with you and negotiate the terms. Once that happens, then everyone wants to, and that's why you end up oversubscribed.
Yeah, that exactly mirrors our experience as well. Ella, I think you want to ask some questions about the consumer side of things.
Yeah, so I noticed that Daisy Lab had carried out a bit of consumer research with New Zealand consumers about dairy without the cow. And I think it was 75% of consumers that had no hesitations.
Yeah, well, that's the results that we got, and it's definitely anecdotally the sentiment that we get from people in New Zealand. So that research is about a year old, so we've been a bit more in the media. and hopefully we'll continue to engage with the media and with the public. And again, as I mentioned before, we're going to this largest agricultural fair conference in June, which will, again, for anyone who maybe doesn't know about Daisy Lab in New Zealand, will know about Daisy Lab in New Zealand. And we expect the customer interest to stay high because, again, people, when it's something about dairy, people go and read about it. People go and research about it. People go, oh, I have some concerns. Maybe could I address that? So they do some more research. They have a really good understanding what this technology is and isn't, compared to, say, an average consumer maybe in the US, right?
Yeah.
So I think, I don't think that number is lower now. I think if anything, it would be higher.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It's also special. Yeah, it was a little bit of a special group of the consumers as well. So we looked for sort of your higher segment purchases, more of that premium dairy and alternative dairy purchases. So again, just to be completely honest and transparent, so if we go maybe into a more lower segments of pricing, there could be a different picture. But I don't think it would be reversed. Like, I don't think it would be like 25 versus 75. I think still there would be a good percentage of consumers being really interested.
Yeah, and that's so important for the success of the whole alt protein industry, is that consumer acceptance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. Like, if it doesn't matter what we're doing, if the consumer's not going to purchase it, then it's not going to go anywhere. So it's absolutely, I think, the most important part.
I know New Zealand is a drop in the ocean when it comes to consumer part of the equation, but I am confident that New Zealand consumers will buy the product. We just need to make sure they buy it again and again and again. But that first purchase is going to happen, and it's going to be wild. Like, people will, the way I see it, people will storm the supermarkets to get it. And that's really exciting. We just need to make sure we use this opportunity wisely. And when we come, whether that's us or somebody else using our ingredient, when we go into New Zealand market, we do it well.
No doubt, yeah. I couldn't agree more. I think it'll be a snowball effect once those first sales start happening, and then people see other people buying it. I think it will just take off from there. Irina, thank you so much for your time today. I think we're just about out of time. I'd just like to just personally say thank you for all the work that you're doing. I think what you're doing in terms of Daisy Lab and the innovation, the sustainability aspect, and obviously also the animal ethics side of thing is amazing. Thank you for sharing your story today for our listeners. And for those listeners that want to find out more, where's the best place for them to find you and find out more and support Daisy Lab?
Yeah, so our website is www.daisy, like a flower, lab, like a laboratory, daisylab, one word, .co.nz. And you can contact us through our website, or you can just shoot us an email directly to info@daisylab.co.nz. Just always happy to hear from people.
Amazing.
Thank you very much for having me. I also am fascinated about what you guys are doing. I really wish I was in Australia when you were doing the dumpling tasting, although I know it would be super weird. Like, I have no idea. Like, I haven't eaten pork probably since I was a child. But that I would definitely try that. Like, I have no idea how it would taste to me, but I would try it 100%.
We should try and arrange a co-tasting event where we can have both of our products up for tasting at the same event. That would be great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, all up for it.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's been really great. So
Thank you guys for having me.
Thanks, Irina.
Great.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.